July 15th, 1942. The moonless night cloaked the French coastline in darkness as 6 men in blackened faces slipped from a submarine 2 miles offshore. Royal Marine Lieutenant Richard Pemberton checked his compass, then nodded to his team. They began paddling their inflatable craft toward the Nazi-occupied fishing village of Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer. In his pack, nestled alongside modern explosives and a wireless transmitter, lay what many in British High Command had mockingly called Stone Age technology, a specially designed hunting bow and 6 arrows with razor-sharp broadheads. Pemberton believed the ancient weapon would allow his team to eliminate sentries without alerting the entire German garrison. High Command thought the idea absurd. Silenced pistols were the modern solution. But Pemberton knew what the generals did not. In the field, even the best suppressed firearm of 1942 produced a distinctive crack that traveled hundreds of yards in the quiet night. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how a handful of British commandos revived ancient technology to solve a thoroughly modern problem, and how their primitive solution would ultimately prove more effective than contemporary military science, changing not just tactical doctrine, but the very men who wielded these silent weapons. The Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife gleamed dully in the dim light of the submarine as Corporal James Donovan ran it across the whetstone with practiced precision. Seated beside him, Lance Corporal Thomas Blackwood meticulously blackened his face with burnt cork. The remaining 3 men, Sergeant William Hayes, Private Henry Miller, and Private George Thompson, checked their equipment with the methodical care of men who knew their lives depended on thorough preparation. Each man wore the distinctive green beret of the British Commandos, but little else about their appearance marked them as conventional soldiers. They wore no identification, carried no dog tags, and their battle dress had been stripped of insignia. 2 minutes to launch point, sir, the submarine's navigator announced quietly. Lieutenant Pemberton nodded and turned to his men. Final check, gentlemen, remember. We are here to gather intelligence on beach defenses and coastal gun placements. We eliminate only when necessary, and we do it silently. Sergeant Hayes, a 32-year-old former gamekeeper from Yorkshire with keen eyes and a perpetually furrowed brow, held up the bow case. Sir, are you certain about this? I've practiced with it, but in these conditions... Pemberton understood the concern. The bow was not standard issue. Nothing about No. 3 Commando was standard. Formed in July 1940 as part of Winston Churchill's directive to create specially trained troops of the Hunter class who can develop a reign of terror against occupying German forces, the Commandos operated outside conventional military doctrine. The silenced Welrod has an effective range of 30 yards in daylight, Sergeant Hayes. Its sound carries approximately 200 yards in still night air, despite the suppressor. That bow has an effective killing range of 40 yards in capable hands and makes no more sound than a whisper. Which would you prefer when we're less than 500 yards from a company of German infantry? Hayes nodded, unconvinced but unwilling to challenge his commanding officer further. Their craft was lowered into the dark waters of the English Channel. The men paddled in practiced unison toward the shoreline, the gentle splash of their paddles the only sound breaking the midnight silence. Intelligence had identified this stretch of the Normandy coast as a likely location for the eventual Allied invasion of Europe, but aerial reconnaissance could only reveal so much. The brass needed men on the ground to assess German defenses, identify obstacles and map the terrain. As their rubber dinghy approached the shoreline, Pemberton signaled for silence. The gentle scrape of rubber against sand seemed thunderous in the quiet night as they beached their craft. Thompson and Miller quickly dragged the boat above the high water mark and camouflaged it with pre-cut netting and vegetation. Remember, our rendezvous is 0300 hours in 3 days' time. If you're not at the extraction point, you'll be swimming home, Pemberton whispered. The men nodded grimly. Each knew the mission parameters and the risks. Hayes, Blackwood, you're with me. We'll reconnoiter the eastern approach. Donovan, you take Miller and Thompson and survey the western gun emplacement. Radio silence unless absolutely necessary. The 6 men melted into the darkness, moving with the careful precision of predators in unfamiliar territory. For Pemberton, this was his 7th cross-channel raid, But the tension never diminished. At 34 years old, he was older than most of his men, with a background that made him uniquely qualified for commando operations. Before the war, he had been an archaeologist specializing in ancient military history, with a particular focus on medieval warfare. His fascination with pre-gunpowder combat techniques had started as academic curiosity, but had evolved into practical application. When assigned to No. 3 Commando, he had brought with him not just conventional military knowledge, but theories about ancient warfare that initially earned him skeptical glances from his superiors. As Pemberton led his three-man team through a dense copse of trees, his thoughts returned to the bow secured across his back. It wasn't a replica of an ancient design, but rather a modern hunting bow, a recurve model with laminated limbs capable of delivering tremendous power silently. The arrows were aluminum shafted, with removable broadhead tips designed for big game hunting, modified for their current purpose. The official military designation for the weapon was Alternative Silent Elimination Device Type A, but the men simply called it Pemberton's Folly. Despite the nickname, each had trained extensively with the weapon during their preparation for this mission. A sudden rustling ahead brought the three commandos to an immediate halt. Pemberton raised his fist, and Hayes and Blackwood froze in place, becoming one with the shadows. 50 yards ahead, the unmistakable outline of a German sentry appeared, rifle slung over his shoulder, the cherry glow of a cigarette illuminating his face momentarily as he took a drag. Hayes looked to Pemberton, his hand moving toward his Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife. Pemberton shook his head slightly and unslung the bow from his back. Quietly knocking an arrow, he signaled for the others to remain in position. The German sentry seemed young, perhaps no more than 20 years old, his helmet sitting slightly askew on his head as he paced a short pattern along the edge of the tree line. He appeared relaxed, unaware of the danger lurking in the darkness. Pemberton drew the bowstring back to his cheek, the 60-pound draw weight causing his muscles to strain slightly. He held his breath, compensating for distance and the slight breeze coming off the sea. The arrow flew with a whisper, a barely perceptible sound lost in the natural noises of the night. The German dropped without a cry, the arrow having penetrated his throat just above his collar. Death was instantaneous. Hayes and Blackwood moved forward quickly, retrieving the body and dragging it into the underbrush. Pemberton recovered his arrow, wiping it clean on the German's uniform before returning it to his quiver. One elimination, completely silent. Sergeant William Hayes had been skeptical of the bow since Lieutenant Pemberton had first introduced it during their training at Achnacarry Castle in Scotland. The Commando Training Centre, known as the Castle, had forged each man into a weapon, but Hayes had been particularly dubious about the reintroduction of medieval weaponry. "With respect, sir, we have perfectly good silenced pistols," he had argued during their preparation. "A silenced pistol isn't silent, Sergeant," Pemberton had replied, demonstrating by firing a well-rod pistol, considered the quietest firearm of the era, at a target. Despite its integrated suppressor, the weapon had made a distinct mechanical clack that carried across the training ground. That sound travels approximately 200 yards in ideal conditions. Now listen to this. Pemberton had then fired an arrow at the same target. The only sound was the whisper of the string and the thunk of the arrow striking home. In the field, that difference could mean the difference between success and a German battalion hunting us down, Pemberton had explained. Now, as Hayes helped conceal the body of the German sentry, he grudgingly acknowledged the lieutenant had been right. The elimination had been completely silent, more so than any knife kill, which often involved struggle and the risk of the victim crying out. "Sir, German patrol approaching from the east," Blackwood whispered urgently, his ear pressed to the ground. The young Lance Corporal, a former poacher from Devon, had an almost supernatural ability to detect movement through ground vibration. The three men quickly took cover as a German patrol of 4 soldiers moved through the area, roughly 50 yards east of their position. Had they eliminated the sentry with a firearm, even a suppressed one, the patrol would almost certainly have investigated. "They're checking the perimeter. Regular patrol pattern," Blackwood murmured after the Germans had passed. 15-minute intervals. Pemberton nodded. "Good. That gives us our window. Let's move." The three commandos continued their advance inland, moving with the careful deliberation of men in hostile territory. Their objective was a German coastal battery located approximately 2 kilometers from their landing site, a fortified position housing artillery pieces capable of targeting ships in the English Channel. As they moved through the darkened landscape, Pemberton reflected on the development of commando tactics. The British Army had initially been reluctant to embrace the concept of special forces. Traditional military thinking emphasized large-scale operations and conventional tactics. But Churchill had recognized the need for unconventional warfare, for men who could strike from the shadows and disappear just as quickly. The first commando raids in 1940 had been learning experiences, often costly ones. Of the original 250 men who volunteered for No. 3 Commando, only 71 remained active by 1942. Many had been killed or captured during early operations in Norway and France. Those failures had driven innovation in tactics, equipment, and thinking. Traditional military doctrine proved inadequate for small-scale raiding operations behind enemy lines. New approaches were required. Pemberton had argued for the reintroduction of ancient weapons alongside modern ones. His background in archaeology had given him insight into how pre-modern warriors had solved problems still relevant to 20th century warfare. How to kill silently, how to move unseen, how to strike terror into an enemy. The bow was just one example. Alongside it, the Commandos had adopted variations of ancient camouflage techniques, prehistoric hunting methods for moving silently, and blade designs based on Bronze Age daggers. "Hold," Hayes whispered, raising his fist. The 3 men froze. Ahead, the trees thinned, revealing a cleared field of fire surrounding a concrete bunker. 2 searchlights swept regular patterns across the open ground, while a barbed wire perimeter marked the outer defenses. German soldiers moved with disciplined precision, manning machine gun positions and monitoring the approaches. "I count 24 personnel visible," Blackwood murmured after a long moment of observation. 4 machine gun nests, 2 searchlight positions, and what appears to be an observation bunker. Pemberton removed a small notebook from his pocket and began sketching the layout, adding annotations about defensive positions and patrol patterns. This was the real purpose of their mission, not sabotage or assassination, but intelligence gathering. The information they collected would help planners back in England understand the defenses they would eventually need to overcome. "Artillery pieces?" Pemberton asked quietly. 3 visible emplacements, sir," Hayes replied. "Look to be 150mm coastal guns, range approximately 20,000 yards, capable of engaging targets throughout this sector of the channel." Pemberton made additional notes. The presence of heavy artillery confirmed the importance of this position. It would need to be neutralized before any landing could take place in this sector. "Sir, movement at R6, Blackwood suddenly hissed. The 3 men turned to see a German soldier approaching their position. He hadn't spotted them yet, but his path would take him directly to their hiding place. There was no time to retreat without being seen. Hayes reached for his knife, but Pemberton was already drawing an arrow from his quiver. In one fluid motion he knocked, drew, and released. The arrow took the German in the chest, puncturing his heart. The man collapsed without a sound. "Quickly," Pemberton ordered. "Drag him into cover." Hayes and Blackwood moved swiftly, pulling the body into the underbrush. The arrow had penetrated the man's heart, killing him instantly and silently. Had they used even a suppressed firearm, the sound would likely have alerted the nearby German positions. "That's 2, Hayes muttered, a new respect in his voice, as he glanced at the bow in Pemberton's hands. Meanwhile, 3 kilometers to the west, Corporal James Donovan was facing a different challenge. His 3-man team had successfully infiltrated the perimeter of the Western Artillery Battery, but now found themselves pinned down between patrols, with little cover and a German sentry box just 30 yards away. Donovan had been a police officer in civilian life, accustomed to methodical, by-the-book operations. The chaos and improvisation of commando raids often tested his preference for order. At 29 years old, he was the oldest in his team and felt the weight of responsibility for the 2 younger men. "We can't stay here," Private Thompson whispered. "The patrol will be back in 5 minutes. And we can't move forward with that sentry in position," Donovan replied, assessing their options. Miller, what's your read? Private Henry Miller, a 23-year-old former engineering student with a talent for memorizing details, had been mentally mapping the German patrol patterns. The main patrol passes this position every 11 minutes. The sentry is static, but rotates with another guard every 2 hours. By my calculation, the rotation is due in approximately 23 minutes. Too long to wait, Donovan decided. We need to eliminate the sentry. Unlike Lieutenant Pemberton, Donovan had not been issued a bow. His team relied on conventional silent elimination techniques, knives and garrotes. The challenge was closing the distance to the sentry without being detected. I'll handle it, Thompson volunteered. At 21, he was the youngest and most agile member of the team, with experience as a cat burglar, before being offered the choice between prison and military service. Too exposed, Donovan countered. He'll see you coming across that open ground. The three men considered their options in silence. The sentry stood in a small wooden box, occasionally scanning the surroundings with binoculars. His position offered a commanding view of the approach to the artillery battery, exactly why the Commandos needed to eliminate him. Sir, Miller said quietly, what about a distraction? Something to draw him out of position? Donovan considered this. What did you have in mind? The lieutenant mentioned that German discipline often breaks down when it comes to smoking regulations. The wind's coming from the east, if we can get something burning downwind. Creating a fire risks compromising the entire operation, Donovan objected. Not a fire, sir, Miller clarified. Just enough smoke to make him curious. Donovan thought for a moment, then nodded. Do it, Thompson. Be ready to move the instant his attention shifts. Miller removed a small tin from his pack, part of their emergency signal kit. Opening it carefully, he extracted a chemical tablet designed to produce dense smoke when activated with water. Breaking the tablet in half to reduce the volume, he added 3 drops from his canteen and quickly closed the tin, leaving just a small opening. A thin tendril of white smoke began to drift toward the German position. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Then, as the scent reached him, the sentry emerged from his box, rifle in hand, peering into the darkness toward the source of the smoke. Thompson moved instantly, a shadow flowing across the ground. Before the German could return to his post, Thompson was on him, one hand clamped over the man's mouth, the other driving his knife into the base of the skull where it met the spine. The German died instantly, without even a muffled cry. Clear, Thompson whispered, dragging the body out of sight. Donovan and Miller moved forward to join him. Good work, Donovan acknowledged. Now we can proceed to the objective. The 3 commandos advanced cautiously toward the artillery battery, using the natural contours of the land to remain hidden. As they approached, the scale of the German defenses became apparent. Unlike the eastern battery that Pemberton's team was reconnoitering, this position was more heavily fortified, with concrete bunkers, multiple layers of barbed wire, and what appeared to be minefields protecting the approaches. This isn't what intelligence indicated, Miller murmured, as they observed from a concealed position. These are substantial fortifications. Donovan nodded grimly. The aerial reconnaissance missed the extent of the development. This position could withstand naval bombardment and still be operational. The men began meticulously documenting the defenses, measuring distances by sight, counting personnel, and identifying key vulnerabilities. This information would be crucial for planning future operations. Those aren't standard 150mm guns, Miller observed, focusing his attention on the artillery pieces. They're 210mm railway guns repurposed for coastal defense. Donovan's expression darkened. Range? Approximately 30,000 yards, sir. They could engage ships well beyond the horizon with forward observers. The implications were sobering. Any naval force supporting a landing in this sector would face devastating fire from guns they couldn't effectively counter-battery without putting ships dangerously close to shore. Document everything, Donovan ordered. This changes the entire assessment of this coastline. As the night progressed, both teams continued their methodical intelligence gathering, occasionally eliminating sentries when necessary. Pemberton's team had accounted for 3 German soldiers using the bow, while Donovan's team had eliminated 2 with blade weapons. By 3 a.m., Pemberton's team had completed their survey of the eastern battery and began moving toward their secondary objective, a suspected radar installation located inland. The night remained their ally, with cloud cover obscuring the stars and providing additional concealment. "Sir, I'm detecting increased activity to our north," Blackwood reported after pressing his ear to the ground. "Multiple personnel, moving with purpose." Pemberton frowned. "Response to the missing sentries?" "Possibly," Hayes suggested, though they haven't sounded a general alarm. "Change of plan," Pemberton decided. "We'll circle wide to the east, approach the radar site from the opposite direction." The three men altered their course, moving through a shallow drainage ditch that provided cover from casual observation. The German coastal defenses were proving more extensive than intelligence had suggested, a network of interlocking positions rather than isolated strong points. "The whole coastline is being fortified," Hayes observed quietly as they moved. "This isn't just a defensive position, it's the beginning of a wall." Pemberton nodded grimly. "Which makes our intelligence all the more vital. If the Germans are committing to fixed defenses along the entire coastline—" He let the thought hang unfinished. The strategic implications were clear. Any future invasion would face withering fire from pre-sighted artillery positions, with interlocking fields of fire covering every possible landing site. As they approached the radar installation, they encountered a new challenge. Unlike the coastal batteries, which relied on conventional security measures, the radar site was surrounded by open ground with floodlights illuminating the perimeter. Direct approach would be impossible without detection. "We need to get close enough for visual confirmation of the radar type," Pemberton said, studying the site through his binoculars. "Intelligence believes it's a Freya array, but if it's the newer Würzburg system, its capabilities are significantly different." "Sir, there's a drainage culvert at the northeastern corner," Blackwood pointed out. "It appears to run under the perimeter." Pemberton examined the area Blackwood indicated. A concrete pipe, approximately 3 feet in diameter, emerged from beneath the German position, presumably to channel rainwater away from the installation. "Good spotting, Blackwood. That's our approach." The three men made their way to the culvert entrance, which was partially concealed by overgrown vegetation. Hayes checked for tripwires or other booby traps before giving the all-clear. "I'll go first," Pemberton decided. "Hayes, you follow. Blackwood, maintain position here as lookout. If we're not back in 20 minutes, proceed to the extraction point." Blackwood nodded, taking up a concealed position with a clear view of the surroundings. Pemberton and Hayes entered the culvert, crawling on hands and knees through stagnant water and mud. The confined space was oppressive, made worse by the knowledge that discovery would leave them with no escape route. After approximately 50 yards of difficult progress, they reached a point where the culvert branched. Pemberton paused, considering their options. "Left branch rises toward the installation," he whispered. "That's our route." The two men continued their claustrophobic journey, the sound of German voices occasionally audible through the concrete above them. Finally, they reached a point where a metal grate blocked further progress. Through the grate, they could see the radar installation itself. "It's a Würzburg Riese," Hayes confirmed, referring to the giant parabolic radar antenna dominating the center of the compound. "Range approximately 80 kilometers. It could detect approaching aircraft well before they reach the coast." Pemberton sketched the installation quickly, noting defensive positions and personnel numbers. This radar was a critical part of Germany's early warning system. Information about its exact location and capabilities would be invaluable to RAF bombing planners. Their reconnaissance complete, the two men began their uncomfortable retreat through the culvert. As they neared the exit, Pemberton suddenly froze. "Something's wrong," he whispered. "Blackwood should have signaled." The standard procedure was for the lookout to tap the culvert pipe 3 times as warning if danger approached. The silence was ominous. Cautiously, Pemberton peered from the culvert entrance. In the darkness, he could make out multiple figures moving near their exit point. German soldiers, at least 6 of them, searching methodically through the underbrush. "Patrol," he breathed to Hayes. "They've found our trail." The Germans hadn't yet discovered the culvert entrance, but their search pattern would bring them to it within minutes, The two commandos were effectively trapped. Pemberton assessed their options rapidly. A firefight was out of the question. Even if they eliminated these soldiers, the gunfire would bring the entire German garrison down on them. Retreat back through the culvert would only delay the inevitable. The bow, he decided, unslinging the weapon from his back. Stay here. Before Hayes could object, Pemberton had slipped from the culvert, using the darkness and vegetation for cover. The Germans were spread out, moving in a standard search pattern. Pemberton selected his target, the soldier farthest from the others, and drew his bow. The arrow flew true, taking the German in the throat. He collapsed silently. The other soldiers, focused on their search, didn't notice the loss of one of their number. Pemberton moved to a new position and selected his second target. Another arrow, another silent elimination. 5 Germans remained. By the third arrow, the Germans realized something was wrong. They called out to their missing comrades, receiving no response. Nervous now, they clustered together, back to back, rifles raised. Pemberton recognized he couldn't eliminate the remaining soldiers without being discovered. But he'd created enough confusion to exploit. Reaching into his pack, he removed a small device, a ticking timer used for psychological warfare. Activating it, he tossed it some distance away from the culvert. The faint mechanical ticking immediately drew the Germans' attention. Shouting warnings about possible explosives, they moved away from the culvert toward the sound. Now, Pemberton hissed to Hayes, who had been watching from the culvert entrance. The two men slipped away in the opposite direction, using the Germans' distraction to break contact. Only once they had put several hundred yards between themselves and the search party did they pause to reorient. "Blackwood?" Hayes asked quietly. Pemberton shook his head. "Unknown. We'll proceed to the rendezvous point. If he's alive, that's where he'll head." The loss of Blackwood was a harsh blow, but both men understood the realities of commando operations. The mission came first. No man was indispensable, not even the lieutenant himself. As they moved through the darkness toward their extraction point, Pemberton reflected on the nature of their work. The commandos operated in a gray area of warfare, not quite conventional soldiers, not quite assassins. They killed from the shadows, gathered intelligence, and disappeared like ghosts. The bow had proven its worth on this mission. 5 German soldiers had been eliminated without alerting their comrades, a feat impossible with even the most advanced suppressed firearms of the era. Dawn was approaching as they neared the extraction point, a small cove west of their original landing site. To Pemberton's relief, they found Donovan's team already there, concealed among the rocks, and waiting for the submarine that would take them back to England. "Lieutenant," Donovan acknowledged as they approached, "we were beginning to wonder." "Ran into complications," Pemberton explained tersely. "Blackwood?" Donovan shook his head. "No sign of him, sir." Pemberton's expression revealed nothing, but inwardly he felt the loss keenly. Lance Corporal Thomas Blackwood had been an exceptional soldier, one of the best in No. 3 Commando. "We recovered something you might want to see, sir," Private Miller said, producing a leather case from his pack. "German documents. We eliminated an officer near the Western Battery and retrieved these from his person." Pemberton examined the papers quickly. They contained orders and specifications relating to coastal fortifications, detailed information about concrete thickness, artillery ranges, and manpower allocations. Intelligence gold. "Good work," he said simply. "This will be valuable." As the first hint of dawn colored the eastern sky, the men moved to the water's edge. Right on schedule, the submarine's periscope appeared offshore, followed shortly by a small rubber dinghy dispatched to retrieve them. 5 minutes to extraction," Pemberton told his men. "Prepare to—" He froze as a figure emerged from the tree line to their east. Instantly, 5 weapons were trained on the approaching shadow. "Hold fire," Pemberton ordered as recognition dawned. "It's Blackwood." The lance corporal was bloodied and limping, his uniform torn and a crude bandage wrapped around his left arm. But he was alive. "Sorry I'm late, sir," Blackwood said as he joined them. "Had to take a detour." "Report," Pemberton demanded, as the men helped Blackwood to cover. "Germans found my position shortly after you entered the culvert. I eliminated 2 before withdrawing, but took a bullet in the arm. Clean through, no major damage. I circled wide to avoid patrols and found something interesting. Blackwood removed a small notebook from his pocket. "Their patrol schedules, sir. A complete rotation roster for the next month. Found it on one of the men I eliminated." Pemberton took the notebook, recognizing its value immediately. Combined with the documents Miller had recovered, they now possessed detailed information about both the physical defenses and the manpower allocations along this stretch of coastline. "Outstanding work, Corporal," he said, using Blackwood's proper rank for emphasis. The extraction proceeded smoothly, the 6 commandos boarding the rubber dinghy and making their way to the waiting submarine. As they pulled away from the French coast, Pemberton looked back at the darkened shoreline. In 3 nights of operations, they had eliminated 9 German soldiers without raising an alarm, gathered crucial intelligence on coastal defenses, and recovered valuable enemy documents. And the bow, his prehistoric weapon, had accounted for 5 of those kills with complete silence. 2 days later, in a secure briefing room beneath the Admiralty Building in London, Pemberton presented his team's findings to a group of senior officers. Maps, diagrams, and photographs covered the walls, detailing the German defenses along the targeted stretch of coastline. "In conclusion, gentlemen, the area designated as Sector 4 is heavily fortified with interlocking fields of fire, extensive minefields, and reinforced concrete emplacements. Based on our observations, we assess that a frontal assault on this sector would result in approximately 70% casualties before reaching the first defensive line." The officers exchanged grim glances. Brigadier Robert Laycock, head of Combined Operations, leaned forward. "Your assessment of alternative landing sites," Pemberton indicated a different section of the map. "This area, 5 kilometers east of our reconnaissance zone, shows significantly lighter defenses. The terrain is less favorable for landing craft, but the reduced defensive coverage makes it a viable alternative." Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, who would later plan the naval aspects of D-Day, studied the map thoughtfully. "And your elimination methods? The after-action report mentions unconventional weaponry." Pemberton had anticipated this question. The bow had been a source of skepticism from the beginning. "Sir, during our 3-night operation, we eliminated 9 enemy personnel. 5 were neutralized using the recurve bow with 100% lethality at ranges up to 40 yards. More importantly, these eliminations produced no audible signature detectable beyond 10 yards. He placed a suppressed well-rod pistol on the table. "By comparison, our best suppressed firearm produces a sound audible to approximately 200 yards in nighttime conditions. Had we used even suppressed firearms for our eliminations, the mission would almost certainly have been compromised." Laycock studied Pemberton with newfound interest. "You're suggesting we expand the use of these weapons?" "I'm suggesting, sir, that modern problems sometimes have ancient solutions. The Germans are expecting conventional weapons and tactics. They've planned their defenses accordingly. Unconventional approaches, including the selective use of pre-firearm weaponry, provide capabilities our enemies haven't countered because they don't expect them to exist on a modern battlefield." There was a moment of silence as the officers considered his words. "Prepare a training program," Laycock finally ordered. "Start with 30 volunteers from the commando units. Let's see if your results can be replicated." 6 months later, in January 1943, a specialized section of No. 3 Commando conducted a raid on a German headquarters in occupied Norway. The operation, codenamed Silent Arrow, resulted in 23 enemy eliminations, 18 of them with bow and arrow, and the capture of an Enigma coding machine. No shots were fired by the British force, and they suffered 0 casualties. By 1944, every commando unit included a silent elimination section equipped with modern versions of ancient weapons, bows, crossbows, and specially designed throwing knives. These units operated in the vanguard of larger forces, eliminating sentries and creating openings for the main assault teams. For Lieutenant Richard Pemberton, the vindication of his theories came with a price. During a raid on German positions in the Netherlands in April 1944, he was severely wounded by artillery fire while covering his team's withdrawal. Though he survived, his active service career was over. After the war, Pemberton returned to archaeology, eventually becoming a professor at Oxford University. His wartime innovations remained classified for decades, but his contributions to special operations doctrine influenced military thinking well into the Cold War and beyond. In 1972, now in his 60s, Pemberton received a visitor at his Oxford office. William Hayes, his former sergeant, now a silver-haired man in his 60s. "I thought you might want to see this," Hayes said, placing a wooden case on Pemberton's desk. Inside lay a weathered recurve bow, the same one Pemberton had carried on that mission to the Normandy coast 30 years earlier. "Where did you find it?" Pemberton asked, running his fingers along the laminated limbs. "War Museum was doing an exhibit on unconventional weapons. I recognized it immediately, thought it belonged with the man who had the vision to use it." Pemberton smiled faintly. "Not vision, William, just history. Everything old eventually becomes new again, if you wait long enough." The bow now hangs in the Special Forces Club in London, a reminder that in warfare, as in much of life, the most effective solution isn't always the most technologically advanced. Sometimes the ancient wisdom proves more suitable than modern ingenuity, a lesson that Lieutenant Richard Pemberton and his men learned on the dark shores of occupied France, armed with weapons that bridged millennia of human conflict. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.